Hi everyone, welcome to my quick guide to starting a Paul McCartney collection. If you're thinking of either starting collecting Paul McCartney CDs or even Spotify playlists, I'm going to show you my recommendations for how you can get started with this. So Paul McCartney is the most successful songwriter in the history of popular music, and some people don't particularly think that he did a great deal after the Beatles. Well, I'm going to prove you wrong here. I'm going to show you a great way to start a collection that will give you some absolutely fantastic songs that show you that he was the equal of what he did in the Beatles on many occasions. So all of these can be picked up really cheap. I'm not going to show you anything that's rare or expensive here, but these are just my recommendations for studio albums, if you want a live album or two, and also if you'd rather just pick up a compilation. I'll show you now. So for the 1970s, I've got two recommendations for you. First of all is Ram from 1971. Now if you can, pick up this version that says Paul McCartney Archive Collection down the spine there. This is a remastered version. If you can get the 2-disc version, then it's got plenty of extra tracks as well from those particular sessions. One of his great albums. I would definitely recommend that you pick that one up. Also from the 1970s, I'm going to recommend Band on the Run. So even non-Paul McCartney fans are likely to have heard of this album. It's his most famous post-Beatles album. Again, if you can, look for the version that says Paul McCartney Archive Collection down the side there. Is that going to focus? There you go, Archive Collection. There'll be a 2-disc version that's got a load of extras on as well, but that is an absolutely classic album. It's one of the albums of the 1970s. I would say stick with those two for the 1970s for now. If you enjoy that, then by all means go on and look at the further albums that he made, because there's some great stuff there. For the 1980s, if you're just going to pick up one album, I would recommend you pick up Tug of War from 1982. Now, there is a version available that's got that Paul McCartney Archive Collection sticker down the spine. I don't have that because I've got over here the deluxe version up there, so I don't have that particular version. But pick that up if you can. It's got some fantastic songs on it. It was the first album that he made after John Lennon died, so it does contain his tribute to John called Here Today, which is still a song that he performs live in his concerts now. So that would be my 1980s suggestion for you. For the 1990s, I would definitely recommend you start with Flaming Pie from 1997. Absolutely wonderful album. It just come off the back of Beatles anthology documentaries, which was about a 10-hour series of documentaries. And I think it had got him in the mindset of thinking of the quality that he used to put in as a Beatle, and he was absolutely back to that quality for songwriting. So Flaming Pie, you can pick that up really cheaply. There is no archive collection version of this as I speak in early 2019. That may change in the future, but that's a great album. Now for 2000 and beyond, I'm going to give you 3 different options here depending on what you want from Paul. If you want something that's sort of a quiet piano-based album, not particularly full of rockers, then I'm going to recommend to you Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. It's quite a mellow album, but it's really nice songwriting. Paul's still singing really well on this album, and it's definitely worth you checking out. That's the alternative cover I've just slipped on there. You may or may not get one with that. These don't have an archive collection version. If you want something that's a bit more poppy, a bit more rocky, then I would recommend Memory Almost Full. The versions that you see in shops online may look different to this. There might be a normal CD style. This is just a deluxe version. I really love this album, and it's very, very upbeat, quite inventive, and there's some really good stuff on that album. If you want to know what Paul can do now, how creative he can still be even at the age of 76, then I would definitely recommend you get Egypt Station from 2018. So this, as I record this, is his latest album. It's a fantastic album. I've got a separate video giving my thoughts on that. But if you want something that shows how creative he can still be, that's the one to go to. So for studio albums, that's where I'd recommend you start. If you're thinking of whichever period of Paul's career, they would be my recommendations for starting off. If you want a live album or two, then here's my recommendations for that. First of all, Wings Over America. So this was from the mid-1970s, and again there is a archive collection version of this which is worth picking up because it is remastered. This is Paul McCartney at his absolute peak as a live performer in the mid-70s when Wings were selling out stadiums. It's got a few Beatles songs on, but not many. It's mainly his solo stuff on there, but it is a fantastic album. If you'd rather have a Paul McCartney album that's got quite a lot of Beatles songs on it, you've got a few choices. But what I'm going to recommend, and this depends on where in the world you are, it's either going to be called Back in the World, or it's going to be called Back in the US, which you're more likely to see if you're in America. I'll just hold both of those up for a second. Now, the track listings are about 90%, 95% identical on each of these. There's some slight differences, but essentially they're pretty much the same album. And you've got a lot of Beatles songs on here, a lot of solo songs. Paul was still in really good voice. This is sort of from around about 2002, 2003, I think, were these recordings. And he was his voice was still sounding really good then, so that would be a good recommendation for a more recent Paul McCartney album that's got a lot of Beatles songs on it. And the last thing I want to show you is if you're thinking of just getting a compilation, either on CD or if you're wanting to look on Spotify, then Paul doesn't have as many options here as a lot of major artists. He hasn't had many compilation albums over the years, but what I'm going to show you is my recommendations here. So if you want something that covers about the first 15 years of his solo career up to the sort of mid-1980s, then I would go with All the Best. Again, there is a version that was released in the US that might look slightly different to that, but essentially it's very, very similar. And that covers pretty much all of his biggest hits up until that point. This, for me, was my introduction to Paul McCartney as a solo artist. Never did me any harm. It's a fantastic album. If you want something that just sort of mainly covers the 1970s period, then this is an interesting one called Wingspan. It's a 2-disc album. One disc is called Hits, which has got the more sort of popular singles kind of stuff on, and the other disc is called History, which goes a bit more into sort of deep cuts. And you're going to get a few sort of surprises on here that you might not expect to find, but this was intended as a sort of an anthology of his Wings career, so that's worth picking up. Or the third option that you've got that I would recommend is an album that came out in 2016 called Pure McCartney. Now, this is the 4-disc version. There is a 2-disc version as well, I believe. This is probably the most expensive thing of everything that I've shown you to pick up. You might have to spend maybe £5 or £6 getting hold of this one second-hand, whereas the others you can get for pence. Okay, but this sort of came out of the blue, and it's a very unpredictable mix of songs on here. Nobody could have predicted what would appear on here. There's all sorts of hits and deep cuts and things that should be there or you'd expect to be there that aren't. But it's a really good overview right up to, I think, Hope for the Future, which was 2015, I think that came out. It goes right up to there from 1970, and that's a really good overview. And everything that's on here is remastered pretty much, so that's well worth getting hold of as well. I'm probably going to do a separate video where I'm going to review some of these in depth. But I just wanted this to be a quick overview. If you're thinking of either buying some Paul McCartney CDs and finding out what he was like as a solo artist, or you want to know what to search for on Spotify, what things to listen for in terms of studio albums, live albums and compilations, then those are my recommendations for you. If you've got any comments at all, if you'd recommend something else to a beginner to Paul McCartney, then let me know. I know there's loads of other great albums out there, but these are the ones I wanted to focus on. Let me know in the comments. Love to hear from you, and I'll hopefully see you again for another video soon. Thank you. Bye bye.